And I'm going to be giving just a quick presentation about how to add trends to your homepage. So I'm a big show of hands person. I know I've asked you already a lot of questions, but just out of curiosity, people are familiar with Algolia. Who has used Algolia Recommend? Okay, we've got a couple people. Who's used another recommendation engine of any sort? Okay, so we've got one more there. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about recommendations and the Algolia Recommend product. I'll try not to spend too much time on it, but I want to talk a little bit about how recommendations are made, what kind of goes into them, and then a little bit about how you can use them in your website. Okay? So recommendations. Kind of the biggest difference between recommendations and search, right, is search is what your users use when they know what they want, right? They come to your site, they type into the search box, and they say, this is the thing, go take me to it, right? And they want very specific, accurate results. Recommendations are what happens when a user isn't quite as sure what they want. They might want some suggestions or some sort of nudge in the right direction to help them get to the thing that they're looking for. So for those that don't know, this is from an American comedy called How I Met Your Mother. The main character, Ted, has a friend named Barney who plays this lovely game where at bars he taps random strangers on the shoulder and says, have you met Ted? And then walks away. And so I think that's a good representation of the type of things that you can get with suggestions. Maybe not necessarily the best way to do suggestions, but I will say that this is one of my favorite comedies, and I recommend it to you. So, but that's not necessarily how Algolia does recommendations. Algolia, the Algolia Recommend service is much like our search service, sort of a fully packaged way to add recommendation experiences for your customers, for your end users. And it provides both the back end to generate the recommendations and front end libraries for integrating into your website. And the way that we do it is very similar to the way other recommendation engines work, which is through supervised machine learning models. So basically, anytime you hear about like a recommendation project, probably what it is it's a series of curated models that are used to address different types of recommendations. And we'll go into some of the models that Algolia provides and sort of how you would use them. But the premise here is that you would take these models and then feed them your data in order for the models to learn about your product catalog, your content, whatever it is that you have in an index, and then generate recommendations for you. And so the reason you would want to add this to your site is it encourages users to kind of look beyond the initial thing that they came for. Maybe there's something else that they would want. You know, an easy solution would be, hey, you need batteries with that, right? People often buy batteries. Or maybe there's something that complements a product. And these are reasons that you would be wanting to use Algolia Recommend. So like I said, our Recommend product has 4 different models. There are sort of 2 models that we were released with, which are the ones that you see here on the left, frequently bought together and related products. And then we've added 2 additional models, which are the 2 trending models on the right. And the way I've sort of set up this slide is to demonstrate the different types of context that you need to use the different models. So the ones on the green side on the left, these are all within an item context. That means that in order to use the model, we need to know what product the user has looked at already so that we can offer recommendations that sort of align to that product. Whereas the new trending models on the yellow side are product agnostic. So these are based on the entire contents of your index, right? So we can tell you recommendations just based on what other people have done generally. The x-axis here, or I'm sorry, no, the y-axis here is actually the type of data that we need to feed the models. So there's a couple of different ways that you can train a model for recommendations. And the majority of our models are up here in the top quadrant. They use something called collaborative filtering, where you're feeding them event data, actions that other users have taken on your website. The bottom part is for content-based filtering, where we can do recommendations through training models based on attributes of the items themselves, right? Maybe it's color, maybe it's categorization. And you'll notice that the one model that we have that kind of uses a little bit of both is our related products, which can actually use a combination of information about the product or piece of content itself, along with event data to sort of make recommendations of similar items. So how does this look like in practice? So let's start with sort of the most obvious, which is the frequently bought together, right? This is a great model to use for checkout experiences. So you have a user that has come to your website. They have self-selected that, yes, this is actually something I want to purchase. I've actually put it into my shopping cart. And that's a great opportunity to use the frequently bought together model, because this model has been trained on data about what other users have purchased when they've purchased this product through some sort of conversion event. Maybe it's they added it to the cart, maybe they clicked purchase, maybe they starred it, but we can offer recommendations. So in this case, hey, you're buying this bikini, you might want a pair of sandals that match, or a towel that has the same sort of palm pattern on it. Stepping up from the checkout, say you've got a little less context, right? You are on a product page. So we know that a customer has actually selected an item. Maybe they're not necessarily ready to purchase it yet. This is a great opportunity to use a related items model. These models, again, remember, use a combination of information about the product itself or the item and user events, what other people have done, to offer recommendations of other things that might be similar, right? So maybe I was looking for a blue swimsuit. I've got this blue bikini, but maybe what I actually wanted was more of a one piece or another sort of product that's similar. This is a great opportunity to sort of offer those types of things. And it's nice too, because this model, again, doesn't necessarily have to have 100% user experience. It can be done based on the product itself. But what if the user hasn't clicked on anything yet? What if they've just come to your homepage and we don't know anything about them? Well, this is an opportunity to use those trending models I was talking about. So these models don't necessarily need the context of an individual product. They can offer recommendations just generally across your whole catalog, right? So maybe it's summertime, so things like swimsuits, sandals, and shorts are top of mind for everyone, and so they rise to the top of your page. Then as the seasons change, that might switch to coats, right? Or flannel shirts, or what have you. So we can offer both recommendations based on facets, like a category. We can also offer recommendations of individual products as well. And the trending, one more thing about the models themselves. Again, the models need to be trained on data. And I'm not going to go through sort of all the specifics here. This is all in the documentation as well. But just be aware that if you're using Algolia Recommend, or frankly any recommendation engine, you're going to need to feed it lots of good data. It's just like any machine learning situation. And so some of these models require significant amounts of data, like our related products needs about 10,000 events. Some of them need very specific types of data, like frequently bought together. Obviously, we need to have customers purchasing multiple things at the same time in order to be able to train them. The trending items model and the trending facets model, which are the ones that we're going to talk about today, they are fed a diet of conversion events. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about those models now. Again, as I mentioned, the trending models aren't isolated to a single product. They go across your whole catalog. And they use collaborative filtering, which is based on event data. And the important thing for them is conversion events, right? So we want to know what people are buying, what people are actually watching, what people are subscribing to. And we're going to make our recommendations based on that. And the way the trending models work is, since we don't have a specific product that we're kind of focusing on, we tend to focus on time. So this model is doing linear descents that are essentially based on the number of conversion events, yes, but also how those conversion events are trending over time. So are people buying more of it than they bought 3 days ago or 30 days ago? Are people buying less of it than they were last week? And that's how these models are trained, and that's how the individual items are scored. So I'm going to show you a little bit about what this looks like in practice. So I'm just going to quickly go into the Algolia dashboard. So you can see recommend sits right here just below search. And you get to a nice dashboard page that kind of tells you a little bit about each of the different models and how you might use it. So in our case, what we're going to do is we're going to try and add trending categories to our e-commerce homepage, kind of similar to what I was just showing a second ago. And so what you would do typically is you would say start using. You would pick an index. So in the Algolia world, we're going to hear more about this in Dea's presentation, but in the Algolia world, everything is an index, right? So all of your data needs to come into Algolia essentially as JSON objects that could be pushed up into an index and then are consumable both for search and for recommendations. So the index that I'm going to pick is my production e-commerce index. And then the second piece, of course, that's important is the event information, right? So one good thing to think about is if you want to use recommend tomorrow, you should have started collecting data probably 30 days ago. So if you're thinking about using recommend you should be thinking about using insights or some mechanism for collecting those event data. Now, the good news is if you're using something like Google Tag Manager already or something else to capture those events, there are opportunities to take that data and push it to recommend as well. So it doesn't have to be through our Insights API, but you need some sort of mechanism to push that data up. Once recommend feels like it has enough data, it does an evaluation, and it gives you essentially the thumbs up to say, okay, I can train the model now. If it doesn't have the appropriate amount of data, or if the data doesn't quite match up properly, you'll get messages that sort of explain to you why, so that you can correct those. Once you have the model ready, you can actually go ahead and train it. Oh, the other thing that you need to do is tell it what type of model you want to do. So for trending, we have the opportunity to do trending items, where you can show individual products, right, recommendations just across the catalog, or say in women's shoes, or facets, right? So in our case, we want to do one based on the category page ID, because we want to show the top categories for our content. And then once you have all that in place, you can go ahead and start training the model. Now, I believe what this is going to tell me is that I've already got an existing model, so we don't need to train it. So we'll jump over to that model. So this is the model, having already been trained. You get information about when it was last trained, how much data is in there, and you get a nice preview, so we can start seeing, women's shoes seem to be ranked very high based on the events that we've collected so far. So that's going to show well above something like, say, accessories. And then you also get a little bit of code here, but we're going to go ahead and implement this ourselves. So the way we're going to implement the actual front end is using something called the Algolia PWA Ecommerce Template. So we've provided an open source template using a bunch of different tools. It's React, it's Next.js, there's Tailwind in it, and it has a lot of sort of the best practices around adding search to an e-commerce site. So I recommend if you don't have a front end already and you're looking for some ideas about ways to sort of build out the different pieces of it, it's a great place to start. But it doesn't have the new models in it yet, so we're going to go ahead and add those as well. Oh, and this is the URL for that if you want to check it out. So jumping over to the code here. Oh, this got very small again. I'll make it bigger. There we go. So one thing I like about this progressive web application template is everything is nicely componentized already. And so you can see here you've got components for your header and your footer and sort of all the different pieces of your application. And so what I've done is I've gone ahead and created a new component called, where is it? Facet list. Here it is. So again, this is just a componentized, it's a React component essentially, that goes ahead and it loads in the recommend libraries. It loads in the recommend front end, so we do provide like a React front end for recommend. So you can see I'm pulling in this trending facets, that's the model that we're using. This gives us a nice front end for it. And then we go ahead and, much like we do with our search API, we make a connection via client. You'll still need an API key, your app ID, and your index name. Then we've got a little bit of typing, because this is all in TypeScript-ish, not the greatest TypeScript. And then we actually go ahead and build out our component. And so what I'm doing here simply is going ahead and grabbing a title for the section. I wanted to abstract this so that we can have multiple sort of blocks with different types of trends in it. This will be particularly for a category 1. And then we've got a little bit of styling that we're going to pass in to this component. This is CSS styles that have already been defined, probably by a designer, probably through some sort of design language that we have sort of across the company. And then we're going to go ahead and make our connection to recommend. We're going to retrieve the first 3 categories that, the most popular categories, and we're going to drop them onto our page. And then it's just a matter of taking that component and putting it into our index page. So you can see here I've got my trending categories for my production e-commerce index, and I'm going to be pulling category page IDs. So looking at the before, you can see we've got sort of this nice templatized shopping experience, but it starts with shoes, which might not be the thing that I'm looking for. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and run our dev version now. And then jumping over to that, you can see now the first thing that we see is the most popular categories, which turns out are shoes, but also women's trousers. So the nice thing is that these are fully dynamic. The machine learning model is retrained at regular intervals. And again, as the season changes, right, as trends change, these will dynamically update to the most popular categories at any given time. And so that's kind of the power of recommend, using this combination of essentially back-end trained machine learning models and the front-end libraries to very quickly integrate recommendation into your websites. And if you want to know more about sort of the process of how I built this, there's actually a blog post up on our website that sort of talks specifically about these training models. It dives a little deeper into sort of how they're built, how they work, and walks through the steps that I actually went through to kind of implement that integration. So that's it for my presentation. Does anyone have any questions? Do we want to do, Julie, I'm not sure how the block works. So, but if anyone, okay, we do have a couple questions coming up. Cool. Can I just grab it? Does it work? And I literally throw it at people.
I can go ahead and pass it.
Appreciate it. Cool. All right. So who has questions? So a couple in the back there. Cool. I'll pass this along. I don't know how far forward I can go before this feeds back, so we'll see. Here you go. Cool.
Thank you. Question about your recommendation engine. How do you prioritize the engine? I mean, as a first event, let's say that, I mean, the recommendation is a mix of hybrid of collaborative and the content base.
Right.
As a first event, someone's coming to buy, let's say, swimsuits, and
right.
you have the maximum of 3 recommendations. How do you recommend? Do you recommend another swimsuit or a towel that goes with it?
Right. Okay. So for the this is for the related products.
Yeah, because I mean the information that you have as a first event, the guys came and searched for the swimsuits.
Right. Got
Nothing
it.
else.
So
how do you recommend?
Got it. So the question was, if someone is just new to your site, how do you make good recommendations for them? And so the recommendations, this isn't personalization. This isn't sort of drawn to that particular person. I'm not saying this is the best thing for you. What it's saying is across all of the events, all of the people that have looked at this particular suit, some of them have purchased this suit, but some of them have gone and purchased something else. And the machine learning model is able to sort of weight all of the different products sort of in relation to this product and make recommendations primarily based on that event data. That's kind of the best, richest data is, of the 10,000 folks that have come through and the folks that have looked at this suit, considered buying it, what they actually ended up buying was, a herringbone suit, or maybe they went more casual, right, and got something else. And then the product side of it is sort of like an enrichment almost, right? So it's good for your long tail products, maybe things that people haven't purchased or haven't looked at as much. You can do it just based on sort of different facets, right? Is this in the same category? Does this have something in common with the other products in my catalog? And so it's a great enrichment source, and it's also very valuable for things like say content streaming sites, right? When you're recommending the next thing to watch, you want to know a few things about what they'd watched already. Was it a comedy, right? You don't want to go to a horror movie necessarily right after that. So it's kind of a mixture of those two things. And then both those engines run, and then everything is scored and weighted, and then that's kind of where the recommendations pop out of. And the model is rerun at intervals. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, so I mean, you don't have any bias to add it. Let's say if your e-commerce sites wants to promote something that they had extra, you don't have any metrics to add to this to recommend between these 3 recommendations, one of
right,
the product that the e-commerce wants to sell as well.
Got it, got it. So in those cases where you sort of want to have a little bit of influence or do a little bit of merchandising on top of the recommendations, for the related products, there's actually rules for recommend, much like we have rules for search. So you can actually sort of, after the machine learning model has run and everything's been weighted, you can also have rules that trigger that say, if they're looking, at flannel suits, we're running a special, promote this item, right? So you can definitely do a little bit of merchandising on top of it using the rules. Cool?
Thank you.
Cool. I think there was another question back in that quadrant. Was there someone else? Maybe? No? Oh, was it in front? Okay, in front there. Yeah.
Thanks for the very insightful presentation.
Mm-hmm.
You talked a lot about events based on an e-commerce situation. And how about situations that are different, such as in a streaming platform?
Uh-huh.
If I want to put another event, such as the watch time,
Right.
can it be applied?
Yes,
Or
yes,
is it-
yes. Yeah, so what we do, sort of in our vernacular, we talk about click events and conversion events. And you can actually, if you're using the Algolia Insight API, which is the way that we sort of retrieve events, you can define, I should have put your thing on, Julie, you're right, sorry about that. But if you're using Insights, you can define multiple conversion events. So you could have a conversion event for bought, you can have a conversion event for subscribed, for watched, for favorited, and you can kind of weight them different ways. And then that will all be taken into account.
Okay, and can it be at the detail level of like completion of watching above 75%?
As long as your application has the ability to identify that that's
Okay.
happened and send an event through the API, yes, which I know is kind of a shifty question, but that's sort of our perspective from where we are, since we don't know the streaming platform or whatever your application is. As long as you have an ability to say this event has happened and send it through the API, then absolutely. And again, like if you're using something already like Google Tag Manager or something else, you have that integration, or I believe Segment as well. That data can flow over too. So if you're already doing it, you can sort of layer on top of that.
Thanks.
Mm-hmm. Cool. One more in the back there. Yeah.
Thank you for your presentation.
Uh-huh.
I have a more general question
Sure.
about recommendation and its implementation. You talk about two sides, front end and
Mhm.
back end. You say that in the back end you have recommendation engine, and you have another part held in the front end to quickly integrate in the website. Can you give more information about these two distinctions and what you have currently in the back? You have, for example, the recommendation engine, and then in the front end, you have something to fine-tune. You talk about trendings, facets, and so on. Can you give me more information? Because you can do everything maybe in the back. Do you make your recommendation faster, for example?
Oh, okay. Yeah, I see. So the recommend product follows the model that we took with our search product, which is, we have the machine learning models that we sort of curate on your behalf and we train on your behalf, but we expose everything via an API. So recommend has a full REST API, just like search does. You could definitely hit that API from either side. There's a really cool demo that's up on the site where we actually use recommend to generate emails to send out with suggestions, hey, you bought this product, here are some other products you might be interested in. Obviously no front end component at all, right? It's all sort of generated on the back end. The SDK that we provide is a React SDK that just makes it easier if you're implementing a front end experience, but you could certainly hit the API directly or hit the API with a lower level client and sort of pre-render recommendations on the back end, just so that it takes a little less time. It's very speedy getting those recommendations, because again, we're not running the models real time. The models are already run. The data is essentially overlaid onto your index, so it's the same level of speed that you're used to from our search for interactive search. But you could absolutely use it on the back end as well. Does that help?
Okay, yes, great,
Yeah.
thank you.
Right on. Great. Any more questions? All right, then I think we're going to move on to our second presenter. So, thank you.